Hi, Joe Cerrone. Welcome to this week's Zoom meeting, CAD 230 Introduction to Solidworks. I just released Module 6, which is object part configurations, and it goes through Chapter 8. And so the assignment is to create part configurations of these three parts. If we take a look at the models themselves, this would be, it looks to me like some kind of an engine block of some sort. And what you need to do is to go through and create the sketch and create the part. And then what they have you do is create this cutaway view as a configuration. So it's kind of neat because you can toggle back and forth between these different part configurations, and you can have different part configurations so that you can see these different cutaway views. And then you can restore it back to the default. Other files that are part of this module are the 6B. This is another part configuration file. This one was a little bit tricky. I had to do it a couple of times with getting things to offset and to work on this linear pattern properly. This linear pattern, let's see if I can edit it, uses the very sketch option. So as you create this model, we create this very sketch option within a parts configuration along this sketching line. And then lastly, the other file was to do another part configuration, another very sketch type of a part. Last week was the midterm. And so if we take a look at the files for the midterm, let's take a look at the statistics. So we don't want that. Let's go back to quizzes and exams. Let's look at midterm quiz, midterm test. And if we look at our statistics for that, the average was 88.29%. I don't want to go too much farther because it'll show people's names on it. But overall, the multiple choice test went very well. The average was a very high B, which tells me students are doing the work and following their directions. From a standpoint of the hands-on test, I went through and I graded those also. Those were taken from the Solidworks Associate exam. And if I open those files up, a number of different files for that. There it goes. Eventually it'll come around. I have AT&T internet, which is, it can be a little bit of a, it kind of cuts out on me sometimes. So if we look at the midterm files, we had these part 1, and you were to set the material properties for this one to be nylon 610. And then once we model this part, we calculate out the mass properties. And this is very typical of SolidWorks when you go through a certification exam. What they'll do is they'll have you set the material properties and then calculate the mass out. And this one turns out to be 2.69.5. And if we open up the other files, and then the mass properties for this one was 1,130.44 grams. And the material spec on that was plain carbon steel. And this was 6061 alloy with mass properties of 0.66 pounds. And then lastly, And this is an old CSWA exam part. And this one, it has you go through and set the mass properties, 1,129.17. And you want to be within 5% of that value. The CSWA does have a little bit of a wiggle room as far as these calculations go, but essentially you have to model it exactly the way they have it to get that analysis to be the way it's supposed to be. So that's the midterm. We took the midterm last week. I think I still have one more student who's got to take that. But other than that, I think everybody went and did the midterm very well. We used the HonorLock testing proctoring software for that. And so I was happy to see that most people were able to get through that. I did have one person who had to go out and get a webcam, but I think he actually got his webcam working before he had to go purchase one. But and then I had one other student who forgot his identification, so he had to go back and take it again when he had his ID. But that was the midterm. Midterms went well. If we want to come back and recap what we've been working on. Module 6, I just released it. Last week was the midterm. We had it available for 23 and a half hours. We went through and we had a practice midterm exam where we modeled these parts. And then we used the HonorLock system. And then prior to that, as we go through and take a look at our learning objectives, every week we went through and picked up on a different objective. Before the test, we were looking at patterns, shells, mirrors, and array features. And these were the models that we created for that. And then I added a bonus model. I really like this model. It's a socket wrench developed by Chris Sikora. Chris runs the program over at Elgin Community College. He's got some great curriculum. And then prior to that, module 4 objectives were shell, extrude, taper, and rib features. And then as we start to work our way back, we go into revolves and mirror functions. Overall, everybody has been doing a great job. Getting a little bit lonely on some of these Zoom meetings. Not as many people are showing up as they were before. And I think they're just kind of getting into the, I think people know what they're supposed to do now. Module 6 is due next week. This is module 6. It refers to chapter 8. So that's due at 11:30 p.m. And I'll be releasing a 3D printing project next week. And so we will do a 3D printing project where we'll draw and assemble a model. Typically I have, I've done vices and I've done some steam engines. They're actually pneumatic engines. We don't run them off of steam, but it's really a nice project. And then we go through and 3D print those. We are doing 3D printing over at the Skokie campus, and you can come and pick up your parts once we get to that module and get that released. So with that, the wrap up for tonight will be to cover chapter 8, lab 6. And like I said, that's going to be due next week.